Hello, welcome to this webinar, Knowing the Score. I'm Fiona Murchie, Managing Editor of Relocate Global and Relocate Magazine, and the founder of Think Global People. This webinar is part of a new series to help managers and leaders to support and develop their teams and face the future together, and to build and grow their organisations sustainably, to respond to change and explore new ways of thinking and working. With the impact of coronavirus plus fast change across different industry sectors, economies and geographies, the business environment has never been more challenging on a global scale. That's why this experience is designed to unlock potential and build resilience in you and your team. So sit back and enjoy this musical journey. And here is our running order for today. Why creativity is important right now. Using music to build resilience. Our themes, team dynamics and communication. The big picture, music, diversity, and what this means for teams and organisations. And to allow more of a seamless flow, we've pre-recorded material for today's session, which I'm excited to share with you in a few moments. So please join in the exercise with Paul Williamson and his guests, and we'd love to hear your reactions in the chat. You'll find the chat box to the right of your screen, so please send messages as you go along, and there'll be questions at the end. Many of you will remember Paul Williamson from the Festival of Global People in 2019, where he explored innovation using the world of live theatre to illustrate how to unlock creativity to drive growth and performance in companies. And I'm delighted to welcome him back today. So Paul, lovely to see you. Can you tell us a bit more about yourself?
Absolutely. Well, it's lovely to be here. My name's Paul Williamson. I've worked in the theatre industry for over 20 years. I've got leadership experience in ticketing and sales prior to moving into HR as a profession. I'm CIPD qualified. I've designed leadership programs for emerging leaders, middle management and senior leaders. I'm a qualified executive coach through the Academy of Executive Coaching. I've got experience establishing a coaching culture within a global business. I'm qualified to interpret Hogan personality profiles, and I also do childhood story coaching for leaders too. I mean, in essence, I'm passionate about the arts, and that informs how I coach and how I design learning events. My mission is to use music, art, performance, and storytelling to bring the best out of people. It's really about helping people to discover or perhaps rediscover their passion and purpose, because I believe that that's good for personal well-being and it's also good for business.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much. So just before we start, I think you had something to mention.
Yes. Before we get going, I just want to flag something up. About 20 minutes into the session, there's a section that starts with how well does your score serve you, followed by a guided experience accompanied with music. And I'll ask you to think of a time you felt uneasy, a bit anxious or agitated. First of all, I'd like to tell you that, this is absolutely optional, so you don't have to do it. And you also don't have to close your eyes if you don't want to whilst doing that activity. If you are going to do it, though, I would say choose something mild, so not a major traumatic event. So something like, looking at your inbox when it's full and you've got deadlines to hit, or how you might feel before a big presentation or an interview, or perhaps a time where you've been preparing to have a difficult conversation, that kind of thing. That part of the exercise will only last about 1 minute 20. So if you'd rather not do it, that's perhaps a time to make yourself a cuppa. Okay, so great, let's get started.
Okay, so just to remind you, Paul, if you'd like to turn off the audio and the camera, and we'll begin.
Thank you. It's lovely to be with you today. Thank you for tuning in. And I hope from wherever in the world you're joining us today that you're well. One of the benefits of doing something like this webinar, is actually the permission that you grant yourself to stop, to slow down, to relax and to reflect. I don't know about you, but I'm finding the pace of life is pretty fast at the moment. I find myself kind of working from one big project to another, it feels a bit relentless. And add into that, all sorts of other tasks that we kind of factor into our days. I feel often it's like a checklist, like I'm checking through things. I'm getting through stuff. I'm focusing on getting through the day, getting through the week. And that's a sure sign, really, that I need to take some time for myself, to take some time to relax, to renew, to recharge those batteries. So if you're in that position, then this is a wonderful opportunity for you to explore some of that stuff and learn some new techniques in terms of introducing a bit more calm and a bit more reflection into your life, because it's really important. So for today's webinar, I'd like to encourage you to relax. If you're sitting on an uncomfortable chair right now, I'd like to invite you to go and find somewhere more comfortable to sit, okay? Look after yourself. I'd also like you to, if you've got some headphones or some earphones, to use them, okay? We're going to be listening to some music together in a few exercises, and if you're able to block out any external distractions so you can really focus in on that, I'm convinced that you will really feel the benefits. So hello everyone, my name is Paul Williamson. I'm an executive coach and I'm an L&D practitioner in the creative sector, and today's session is called Knowing the Score. And we're going to look at how we can use music and the idea of a musical score accompanying our lives. And I'd like us to explore how music can be a means to really understand ourselves better, and how we relate to other people. So in terms of what we're going to be looking at, we're going to look at how music can help manage mood, how it can help us build resilience, and how it can help heighten our self-awareness. We're going to look at the science that underpins this, and we're also going to look at how music can really act as a means to recognise our own personal preferences and understand how we show up, particularly in team settings, and the impact that other people have within that setting as well. So we're also going to consider the orchestra as a metaphor for teams and for organisations, and I hope you'll be able to take away some ideas and some actions to be able to practically apply in your work and your lives. The big question is, though, why? Why relax? Why? What's the benefit of doing that? I'm busy. I need to be getting on with things. Why? And why look at something abstract like music? How's that going to help me? That sounds soft and fluffy. Explain to me how it's going to help. Well, did you know that when you get stressed, and when you have feelings that you're overwhelmed with things, as we all experience, did you know this actually affects your brain function? Did you know that when you're stressed and overwhelmed, you're likely to lose between 10 to 15 IQ points? Makes you think, doesn't it? And that's why people, when they're stressed and overwhelmed, make silly mistakes. And if our current times are more stressful and more overwhelming, that's more people making mistakes. So, if you're a leader or a manager of a team, you need to wake up to the fact that actually keeping the people around you calm and helping them to avoid stress and overwhelm, and doing that for yourself and modeling that as a leader is really important if you want a successful organization, because this can impact on people's ability to think straight, make good decisions, and this could cost you not only time, but it could cost you money. So it's really important to do this kind of stuff and to do this stuff well. The other aspect is really to consider our current circumstances. So the context, if you like. We're in the middle of COVID-19 pandemic, and it's impacted on every single one of us, and it's impacted on us profoundly. We've all experienced change. We've all experienced upheaval. It's affected every part of our lives. And it's a time of great uncertainty and unpredictability. So those old notions of kind of having a plan and sticking to it, they don't work in this new world. And what people are having to do is to think much more in the moment, and to work with whatever emerges. Okay, so how do we make sense of it? What do we need most at this present moment in time in order to navigate our way around, through, and beyond the circumstances that we find ourselves in? So some of that is about becoming more comfortable with discomfort. So that old notion of having a plan and sticking to it, if that's not going to work, then we do have to get more comfortable with emergent things, so things that come up. So what's the answer? What's going to help us with this? Well, I would say the answer is creativity. Okay, and I've very purposely chosen this image here. It's of a child, and this child is playing with paint. And some might look at this picture and say that child's making a mess. And that might encourage you to think of our situation at the present moment in time. It feels messy, doesn't it? If a lot of the things that we plan haven't come to fruition and we're having to work in the moment, that can feel messy. But what's interesting is that children cope with this kind of stuff really well, don't they? They enjoy messy play. They get their hands dirty. They use their imaginations, and they are much more carefree and less worried about making mistakes. So they're much more in tune with their creativity. And I wonder if we could connect more with our inherent creativity. I wonder how better equipped we would be to cope with all this uncertainty. And I think the answer is we would be. Okay. Now, lots of people say to me, they say, Paul, that's all very well and good, but I'm not creative. I don't have a creative bone in my body. I like a spreadsheet, I like a tick list, so none of this stuff works for me. I'm not creative. And what I would say is, I don't believe that. Actually, I believe, and I believe it passionately, that everyone is creative. If you just take the subject of problem solving, for example, to solve a problem, you have to use your imagination. To solve a problem, you have to imagine what a situation would be like if you were to do something different. If a different solution was applied, you are being creative. It might not be working with a paintbrush or modeling something in clay, but it's a form of creativity. And we've used these skills and we've honed these skills from childhood, but we need to reconnect with things. So we need to reconnect with that sense of play as well. And I'm really interested in bringing that out in adults, particularly in a work context, because it can give you such a fresh perspective, a fresh pair of eyes, and it can be so liberating to be able to crack that difficult problem through your own creativity and your own resourcefulness. So that's the why. That's why we're doing this stuff. It's like this image. We are allowing ourselves to see the world through a different lens. Okay, and a lens of creativity can give us colour. It can give us a fresh perspective. It can give us sharper focus as well. So We could use art, but today we're going to be exploring this and going on a journey together using music. So I've got three wonderful guests joining me today to open up the conversation. So I'm very excited to introduce Emily Smith. She's General Manager of the Majestic and Empire Theatres in San Antonio in the US, two historic venues dedicated to presenting Broadway shows, concerts, comedians and other live events. Welcome,
Hello.
Emily.
Hi.
We've got Christina Lindenlob, Head of Booking for BB Promotion in Germany. BB develop, market and implement national and international tours of concerts, musicals, shows and events. Welcome, Christina.
Hello.
And we've got Claire Singers, executive coach and diversity consultant in the UK. Prior to this, Claire was managing director and co-owner of LD Communications, the UK's leading music entertainment communications agency.
Hi.
Welcome, Claire. So welcome, everyone. Before we chat, I'm going to put you straight to work, actually. So I prepared an exercise for us to do together. So to do this, I'm just going to share my slides. I've called this a musical interlude. So make sure you're sitting comfortably. Put your earphones in if you've got them. And I'm going to play you some music. The piece will last 3 minutes, 20 seconds. I'd invite you to close your eyes if you'd like to. And let's just see where the music takes you. When you listen to the music, what do you see? What do you feel? Notice any images that enter your mind. Really notice your breathing. If interrupting thoughts enter your mind, try to let them go. If they persist, though, work through them in time to the music. Try that. What new perspectives does the music provide you with? In essence, what I'd like you to do is just take this time to kind of sit back and relax, enjoy the music and kind of go with the flow of it. So are we ready? Let's start. Right, I'd like to invite you to open your eyes if you have your eyes closed. Curious to hear what came up for you while you were listening to that piece of music. So if you want to share your thoughts in the chat, please do so. So I'm curious to hear what came up for you while you were listening. Who wants to go first?
So I first thought of my grandmother because she played the piano, and so I could envision her sitting in her living room playing the piano. I thought the piece was relaxing. I immediately relaxed and my breathing slowed. And it was hopeful. It felt like you were progressing to something positive. And then at the end, I felt the need to slow down and be present. It was beautiful.
Brilliant. Wow. Fantastic. Claire, what about you?
I too found it very optimistic, and I could sort of almost hear the words saying, "We can do this. We can do this." And I started actually thinking of a walk through a wood, actually a sort of a pathway. But I love the ending where she led us in the end.
Fantastic. Thank you, Claire. Christina, what about you?
Yeah, I had the impression of a calm harmony, which was very nice. And I also was thinking about nature, but for me it was more like a river floating a little bit, because it just, the piano kept on like dropping a little bit of water like this. And I mean, of course, it's composed in major mainly, so you get something really positive out of this. And the thing where I was especially connected to water was because sometimes it was slowly going, and then there was like not a waterfall, but it was getting quicker and something like moving, and then it calmed down again. But yeah, maybe because of the major case, it was mainly like a harmony and something peaceful, which I got out of the music.
Brilliant. So I'm going to move us on. We're going to move on to some different exercises now. The piece of piano music we heard earlier was composed and performed by the very talented Rosie Preston. A big thank you to her for allowing me to use it here for this session. So, using music actually has tremendous benefits, and I think just by listening to that piece of piano music has evoked such a lot in such a short space of time. Classical music's tempo is similar to the human heart, so it has various health benefits actually. And lots of studies have been done into this. And so we know that actually listening to classical music can have far-reaching benefits, everything from fighting depression, relieving pain, to sparking creativity and improving productivity. So there's lots of science underpinning this and recommending that classical music should perhaps play a more important role in all of our lives. So I'm going to return to this theme of a film score and the function of a film score. If we think about a movie and how it works, the music is often there to kind of accent emotions and feelings within characters. It helps us to understand the plot. It tells us a bit about the characters, the locations, and important elements of the story. So in this sense, music is very much around emotions. It represents the feelings that we all have. So here's the next stage. I want us to think about, what if our lives had a musical score? What would it sound like? And furthermore, what would your score sound like? And what if other people could hear it? What would they hear? Of course, it wouldn't always be comfortable to listen to, would it? It wouldn't always be upbeat and perky. Sometimes our music might be more dark or contemplative. So one of the questions to ask really is, how well does your score serve you? And I'd like to move on to doing another exercise with you now and using some music to kind of reflect on some of our experiences. Okay, I'd like to ask you to close your eyes And what I'd like you to do is to think about a time where you felt uneasy, maybe a bit anxious or agitated. And I'm going to play you some music and I'd like you to think about that time. So listen to the music, the ticking music, like a clock building up tension. When you think of that time, what caused you to feel like this? What was going on? Where in your body did the unease begin? Locate it now. Put your hand over the place on your body for a moment. What does it feel like? That sensation. Is it still? Is it moving? If you were to picture it, what would it look like? Where does the tension spread to? Where do you feel it in your body? Which muscles start to contract? As you listen to the music, tense those muscles. Exaggerate the tension. Really tense everything up and hold it. And now the final lurch of anxiety. And release the tension. Take some deep breaths in through your nose and out through your mouth. Feel those muscles relax. Shake away any tension you might have. Just be still for a moment. Notice your breathing. Slow and calm. Now, with your eyes closed, listen to this music. Think about a time where you felt totally at ease, totally yourself. Picture it. You're calm. You're comfortable. Where are you? What can you see? Who are you with? What sounds can you hear? What can you smell? Notice how you feel. Where in your body can you locate this feeling? What does it feel like, this sensation? Is it still? Is it moving? What temperature is it? What effect does this have on the rest of your body? Capture an image. Take a mental picture of where you are. What are the words that come to your mind that would describe this place, this memory? Pause and fully absorb the moment. Notice your breathing. Gently become more aware of your surroundings. Open your eyes when you're ready. So I hope you found that useful. In terms of what we were doing there, we were using music and memory to identify some important stages in our stress responses. By locating where it starts for us in our bodies, we're helping ourselves by identifying an early warning system. So personally, I know that when I'm feeling anxious or stressed, it tends to start for me in my stomach, and it's a kind of churning, a moving sensation in the stomach, and then that tends to move to my shoulders. I can feel the muscles in my shoulders starting to tighten up, and that moves to my neck as well. For other people I've coached, it can sometimes present as, a kind of hotness, a burning in the head almost, that moves then to the stomach. So these are early warning systems. And once you get used to kind of locating it in your body and noticing that, it can really help us to then introduce techniques to confuse the brain and reduce the anxiety that we might experience within the moment. And one thing you can do is introduce an interruption or an anchoring thought. So the second part of the exercise, where I played you some more reassuring music and I asked you to remember a time where you felt safe and secure, where you felt more yourself, hopefully that conjured up a memory for you, maybe a particular place. And I asked you to, remember all the senses to try and make it as vivid as possible. And the reason for doing that is that sometimes with this kind of exercise, you can locate a really powerful memory. And just by thinking about that, it will create a physiological change in the body. It will encourage you to breathe more deeply, relax those tense muscles. And in this calmer space, you'll gain access to rational thought, to creativity, and crucially to perspective. And that's really going to help you overcome adversity. So we can see now from the exercises we've done so far that music can really help us to create space, to give us the room to think. It can evoke thoughts and emotions that can be really helpful to us in terms of processing how we think and how we feel. And it can allow us access to our creativity and resourcefulness. It can kind of open things up and give us more of a toolbox to be able to deal with difficult situations. What I'd like to talk about next is how you show up. And we're going to use music to explore this further. And to do this, we're going to use the concept of the leitmotif, which in music is a reoccurring musical theme that represents a character, object, or location, made famous by composers like Wagner, who first adopted this kind of approach where certain characters within operas like the Ring Cycle were represented by some really strong thematic material that audiences could then recognize as they were associated with particular characters. And we've seen this practice really developed within film. So famous film characters have their own theme music, which we're all familiar with. So the question from this is, what would your theme sound like? So if you had a composer striking up an orchestra, which instruments will play first? What tempo will your music be? And what effect will it have on other people? So what we can do, and I like this picture because it kind of suggests the musicality of our voices. And there's a lot to be said to listening very intently to the kinds of words that people use, but also the kind of tone of people's voices and how they express themselves. Because that can give us a lot of clues. And the way in which we speak ourselves also creates a kind of music that other people can hear. So this really is about listening very intently to those people around you. So we're going to do a little exercise now, and I'm going to play you some different themes, pieces of music. I'm also going to show you some images and some words. And I want to see, there are three pieces. So theme A, theme B, and theme C. And I'd like you to listen to each in turn and notice which one you're most drawn to. There'll be elements, undoubtedly, of each of them that you can associate yourself with. But which out of these three themes do you associate most closely with? That's the question. So people that associate with this theme are more likely to come out with sentences that will sound a little like this. So who's going to make sure this is done? When will we complete on that? Where are we in relation to the goals we set? Let's get things moving. Let's agree some actions here. Let's be the best. Okay. So the kind of words you'll hear will be action words, talking about achievement, moving forwards, being accountable, outcomes and performance. So from this theme, you're likely to hear sentences like, how will people feel about the decision? This relationship is important. I care. How can I support you? I feel, I worry, I love. And you'll hear words like empathize, sensitive, well-being, feel, care, love, and hate. So in this theme, you're likely to hear sentences like, what is the purpose? I need to know why we're doing this. I'd like to double check that. If we think about this logically, how does this fit into the big picture? I need to know how this works. I think, I believe. And you'll hear words like ideas, purpose, integration, logic, understanding, theory, values, and patterns. So, having heard those three pieces and looked at the words and seen some of the pictures, I wonder which one of these three you most closely associate with. Was it theme A? Was it theme B? Or was it theme C? Okay, so let us know in the chat which one you associate with, and I'm going to join our guests now and discuss it a bit further with them. So I'm curious which theme kind of stood out for you, which ones, which of those three you most associate with. So shall we start with Christina? How about you?
Yes. And it was quite interesting because I think every theme had, as you pointed out before, something to relate. But for me, theme C stood out by far, I would say. Even like in terms of work-related topics, I'm really goal-driven, and this March theme was something. But theme C was like touched my heart and my soul somehow, because it was like thinking about the deeper things of anything and about new visions. It was also related to something like a departure to a new vision and some new values, and just really getting to understand and know the soul or the deep things of anything related. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you, Christina. Hey, how about you?
For me, it was theme C as well. And I found it incredibly exciting and sort of multifaceted as well, that it had a depth to it. I felt it had sort of light and shade, but this sort of, as Christina was saying, this sort of driving forward. The first, can I talk about the other two as well? Yeah. I mean, obviously the first one is very bombastic and percussive and sort of reeks of authoritarianism in a way, doesn't it? I mean, I'm reading The Plot Against America by Philip Roth at the moment, and it kind of sent me back there. So that didn't sort of resonate. And then the second one, I felt as if I was in a bit of a health spa. And while obviously those values are really important about empathizing and supporting people, it didn't actually do much for me. I found it a little bit, a bit wishy-washy. And then we got to theme C, and it was yes. Now we're in business.
Really interesting. Okay, thank you, Claire. Emily, what about you?
I could relate to all three pieces, but definitely theme A touched me the most. I love that big band sound. I felt motivated and energized, and we could do this. And music like that, that piece gave me goosebumps. So without a doubt, A was me.
Really interesting. So I'm going to share you a bit of a theory behind this now. So I'm going to share some content, and then we'll pick this up in a moment. Okay. So I'd like to share a bit of theory with you now, but I'm conscious that I'm about to distill a rich and very nuanced theory into just a few slides. So my disclaimer here is that I'm going to be simplifying things to quite a large degree in order to give you some new language and concepts to play around with. If you want to dig a bit deeper, though, I will give you some pointers along the way. So feel free to research this afterwards if it piques your interest. So the theory I want to relate this exercise to is something called structural dynamics, and it was developed by David Cantor. an American systems psychologist, organizational consultant, and clinical researcher. So during Cantor's early career as a family therapist, he began to realize that there are recurring patterns of language, behavior, and communication that lead to turbulence in families. He realized that the same patterns exist in teams and organizations. And that interest and subsequent research led to the development of his structural dynamics model. So the model looks at structural levels of communication from level 1, which would be a person's actions observable in a room, through to much deeper levels. Communication domains being the level we will return to when we reflect on the exercise we've just done. The deepest level is childhood story, which I'm not going to go into here. Suffice to say, sometimes when the stakes feel high for us as individuals, a childhood story and subsequent narrative can get triggered, which can affect us in the moment. Those interested in this should read Sarah Hill's excellent book, Where Did You Learn to Behave Like That? Sarah and Tony Melville at Dialogics also run an amazing Coaching the Childhood Story program that I would recommend highly to any coaches out there interested in bringing childhood story work into their practice. So bringing this back to our exercise, in structural dynamic terms, the theme A that we heard would be power, theme B would be affect, and theme C would be meaning. And this fits into the communication domains level that we looked at in the overall model. In power, there's a focus on accountability, competence and completion, so getting things done at pace. Hence, the musical theme was driving with urgent rhythmic percussion, and then there was a bold, brassy, memorable tune which was quite catchy and easy to follow. Then we have affect, where there's a real joy in connecting with others. So in this domain, it's where emotions are acknowledged, it's warm, sensitive, caring. In this domain, relationships are important and highly valued. Hence, the music was warm, emotional, and the pace was noticeably slower. Then we have meaning, where thinking, logic, and purpose are valued above all else. There's a desire here for deep understanding. This is a domain where exploring ideas and theory is stimulating. So the music included a repeating pattern of notes like a heartbeat, and this was represented data. In this domain, the need to know why you're doing what you're doing is absolutely key, as is taking a broader view and seeing the bigger picture. Now, I'm sure elements of each of these will resonate with you. No one inhabits just one of these domains all the time, but there's likely to be one of the three that you're more likely to default to. And it can be interesting to determine which one is your default and explore why that is. So returning to the theme of music then, if we listen carefully to the music of voice, particularly the language we and other people use, we can start to notice these differences. So in power, we hear language used in order to get things done. In meaning, it's often about asking for evidence and action to support a higher purpose. And in affect, it's all about using emotive language to affect feeling and to develop connection and intimacy with others. So, what are the implications of this? So I want to bring this back and have a discussion now, having revealed a bit more about the theory behind it, and I wonder whether, having heard a bit more about that, how you connect with it, and what comes up for you having heard it.
When I heard the word power, I don't feel like I'm the kind of person who needs to have power. So immediately I thought, well, that doesn't feel right, but the piece definitely I associated with. When you said doer, get things done, I'm a doer, and I associate with that accountability, let's get things done. But I also do think that I have some empathy and think things on a personal level. So that helped to understand what the other themes were about.
And don't forget, I've kind of asked you to choose this, but I'm not saying that this is characterizing you. But I guess it's really understanding, you know, the good and the potentially negative sides of each of these communication domains. And you will have a preference, I think, and that will affect how you show up, particularly in meetings and things like that. So what about you, Claire? What any thoughts as you heard a bit more about the theory?
Well, I've read the book, so I do understand about the different, communication stances that people adopt in meetings. I think it's a fascinating book, and I totally related to the meaning, because that I recognize myself in that I do like to get to the goal, to let's get results here, but I do like to understand the logic and the thinking behind it. So I'm not in a rush to hurtle towards getting people to the end point. I do like to actually understand what is underpinning people's thinking in the room. So that really resonated with me, that the music representing that. Yeah.
Great, thank you, Claire. Christina?
It's really interesting because most of the points you mentioned, Claire, I can completely agree with it. I think the music, or it shows that something resonates in you in terms of the music, but you're like, each character is not singular in this way or another way. So there are many things coming together. And I absolutely agree with the meaningful, and I always need to understand and need to have a vision of the big picture and really looking behind the things. But of course, I'm somebody who has a lot of energy, and this resonates in power also. Even this kind of music is nothing I would like normally really listen to if I could choose. Like this.
So in terms of thinking about this in teams and organizations, well, how could people kind of apply this learning? What do you think it offers up for people?
I think it helps them access a different part of themselves. I think it helps them to communicate about themselves in a different way, because a lot of people, especially us Brits, find it quite difficult to talk about how we're feeling and to articulate, whereas music can actually often unlock a person's feelings, and they spontaneously talk about music because it's affected them, and you can see with the body language how it's affected someone. So I think it's a very powerful tool in professional development.
Great. I guess what I was thinking about is, often in teams, when people are quite similar in temperament and similar in communication styles, have any of you experienced that, where you could probably say, oh, actually, I was probably in a room full of people who were probably more disposed towards the power, so driving, talking about actions. Has anyone experienced anything like that? Or perhaps more of an affect feeling in a room or meaning?
Probably I experienced the most a lot of power people in one room. And I don't know, I only can speak for myself, but often if I'm in a team meeting or something like this, and I feel that one side is just has too much strength, I immediately take on an opposite side just to give a kind of balance in the room, notwithstanding if this really would be completely my position, but just to make it a little bit more balanced and moving everything forward. Yeah. I don't know if it's especially related to the theater industry, but often you have a lot of really strong character people with opinions, which they always bring straight forward. And so often there's a kind of clash of power and strength. And of course, you also have to try to listen to the others, even if you have a powerful meaning yourself.
Brilliant, yeah. So I love that, what you're saying about kind of noticing that. And I think that's one of the skills, isn't it, that all leaders can work on. I guess it's being very tuned in to what's happening in a room and hearing what's going on. And then that gives you more choices in terms of how you show up. And actually, if there's too much emphasis on one kind of area, it's within your power, as it were, to introduce some different elements that could end up with a much richer debate. And I think that's the thing I'd encourage you to think about. And for those people listening to this webinar, it's how you bring out that diversity, so you can get real diversity of thought, which is really important now more so than ever. Okay. Anything else anyone wants to add?
Well, I think I recognize in myself that I have that type of doer motivated attitude, and I know with my team that not everyone does approach things like that. And something I have been trying to remind myself is I can't leave people behind because I'm motivated to do this. I have to make sure I'm bringing them along and understanding where they're coming from as well. So
great. Yeah. Anybody else?
Well, like Christina, working in the music industry, I found myself often in a room of powerful white men. And that is challenging because, you're the only female senior around the table. But I have never changed my style to actually mirror them, because I've always wanted to actually show that there's a different way of leading.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Yeah, absolutely. So but it's making those decisions, isn't it, in the moment? And I think I guess it's being very aware of when there is too much of one thing, because to get that diversity, we need to hear all points of view, I suppose, and going, broadening this out and thinking about things like marketing as well. I guess it's easy to take one stance, isn't it, potentially, with particular products or whatever we're trying to market. And I guess if we subscribe to the view that people will have a preference between one of these three, actually communication would be much more effective if we could find a way of speaking in all three languages, if that makes sense, so that we can appeal to a broader audience and draw more people in. So I think it's also useful to think of it in those terms as well. So I'm going to share just a couple more things. If you're in a meeting, I wonder what it could sound like if all of these themes played out. And what if they played out at once? Oh dear, that doesn't sound too good, does it? So yes, if played at the same time, it all clashes. There's a conflict. You can't differentiate between each theme. You can't hear each piece properly. And that's a good metaphor, I think, for model clash. And people stop listening to one another because all of the communication is happening at the same time. So what's the answer? Well, in musical terms, a composer would construct a suite and orchestrate a bridge between each of the musical themes to bring them all together so they could be heard. And this often happens in the end credits of a film. So when the credits are scrolling up, we hear all the music that took place in the film, but beautifully orchestrated into a nice suite. The real life equivalent of that might be to consciously try to access each of these domains by asking different questions at different times. So you might try, first of all, asking, what do you feel? What do we feel as a group about this? And that would be an affect. And you'd encourage those people that inhabit that space more frequently to talk about how they're feeling and get that off their chest. The second question, what do we think, would be much more in meaning. And the third question, what do we want to do, would take it back into action, would be much more power oriented. So by asking these simple questions in that particular order, I think you'd have a much more constructive meeting. You'd allow everyone to have their thoughts and feelings listened to. You'd attend to all of that in a democratic way. And you'd be able to bring people together, I guess. And so you would avoid clash and come together to create brilliant solutions. So that's something to take away and have a think about. Does anyone have any reflections, anything they want to share around this subject, or more broadly on music in general?
I think that music, I'm sure that we're all quite eclectic in our musical taste. And so there's different moods that are reflected. I mean, I can go out in the kitchen, I think I'll put a bit of Foo Fighters on. So I kind of jump around the kitchen, to Dave Grohl. Or I can think, I want to listen to Mozart. And I think having that color palette with music, which reflects different moods and actually can adjust your mood. So in lockdown, there have been moments where you wake up in the morning and you feel a bit low. And then I'll sort of go and put on a piece of music and you feel suddenly much more positive.
I guess that's another question I wanted to ask you around, going back to the three themes of power, meaning and affect. Do you notice a difference between kind of work you and home you? Would it remain the same or would it be different? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I assume there's always a slight difference between work and home you, and even your characteristics are there. And in general, I would like to add that music is extremely powerful. And normally we were pointing out now that we can music to calm down, to relax, whatever. But in general, that we have this gift to use it for whatever, to cheer us up, to give us power, to relax or whatever. And I think often people are not aware that it's like such a treasure to have a variety of music we can take from and select and listen to in order to meet our moods and so on. And I think this is just something wonderful and really special.
Brilliant. Thanks, Christina. Emily?
I would say that there's definitely a difference between work me and home me. And it's probably between home, Emily is probably between theme B and C a little bit. But yes. I mirror everything Christina and Clara have said. I think music is very powerful, and it helps us to express all of those sides of us in different ways. So it's important.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I think having worked with leaders for many years now, I think it's interesting to consider that difference between home and work. And I guess what some of the work that I do with leaders, as you know, is to kind of explore that kind of authentic side of leadership. And there's probably always a bit more that we can do in terms of bringing more of ourselves to work. Because I think there's a tendency sometimes, and we all play different roles throughout our lives, don't we, in different circumstances. So there will always be change. But I guess it's going back to what are those core values? What do we really believe in? Because actually that shouldn't change dramatically between home us and work us, if that makes sense. And to explore about bringing more of that into work. And
isn't that, can I just, because I think this is so opposite of what's happened with us being locked down, where most people have been working at home. And so the boundary between, the person that used to go out to the office, that's diminished so greatly, hasn't it? And you're working in your home environment. So I'd be very interested to see if what effect actually that's having on people in terms of, perhaps the music that they're listening to. They may be having their headphones on, listening to different music while working at home, and then so bringing a different person to work.
Yeah. So what are your thoughts around that?
Well, as you know, I'm a huge advocate of blended working, and I think that's one of the advantages, of this period, actually, because I think it gives people of greater diversity more opportunity in, a whole variety of roles. I think it's a really good thing. I think you're bringing more of yourself into the workplace in a way.
Yeah, and I think that improves your chances of making really meaningful connections with people as well, don't you? In terms of how you show up and the quality of your relationships, I think really depends on your ability to be able to be yourself, to be able to articulate what you believe in. It's really, really important, I think.
I just wanted to add maybe that I think somebody who is leading a team, sooner or later you will find out if he's authentic or not. And as I pointed out, I think a person always has a variety of different things. But if you are not honest to yourself, your team will also feel this on a certain point. And therefore it's important that these home you and work you are not too wide, like apart from each other, because then I think it just doesn't make any sense in terms of being authentic with a team, with yourself, and how you operate with things.
Yeah.
And of course, I mean, talking about being in lockdown and that the social communication is not that close anymore because we don't meet at the coffee station, whatever. But if you feel like having a chat, you still can take your phone now and call somebody and say, well, it's time for a coffee more or less, and we can't have a coffee together, but I can give you a quick call now, and maybe you need to bring me down, whatever, to cheer me up. And I mean, if you have this feeling, then you still find ways to develop it, even if you're in your home office, whatever. And then it's just about doing things and also being a bit disciplined or something like this.
Yeah.
Absolutely, very good. So I'm conscious of time, so we should bring this to a close. But before I do, I just wanted to finish up by considering the orchestra as a metaphor. If you think about how an orchestra operates, it's made up of so many different instruments. There's whole different sections full of different instruments, from strings to brass, timpani, woodwind, and actually for different pieces of music, they bring in even more exotic and wonderful instruments to get a particular sound. And an orchestra and the piece of music that it produces is all the richer for it. Okay, it's about that diversity, it's about that difference, and it's about allowing each section of the orchestra to have its own voice and to hear that. And to weave it into the tapestry of the music. And I think our teams and our organisations would be so much better if we thought of it like an orchestra. And we thought of the people that populate our teams and our organisations like we would instruments. And to bring out the very, very best out of all of the employees that we have. And in this context, I think the leader really does take on the role of conductor. And going back to my favourite film composer, John Williams, I came across a story not long ago about Kobe Bryant, the basketball player, sadly, who passed away in tragic circumstances fairly recently. But when he was coaching his basketball team, he was notorious for actually contacting people from all walks of life to ask questions about leadership. And one of the people he contacted was John Williams, because he loved John's music. And he contacted John Williams and asked him, how do you get such a magnificent performance from orchestras, from all these diverse people, from, how do you get that sound? How do you get them to play so well together? And the response John Williams gave was really telling, and I'd like to share that with you now. He said, if I hear something is off, I can just interject and give them the answer. But I found it's better to ask them questions about fixing what's off, because most of the time the answer I'll get back will be a better answer than the one I had. And I think that just cuts to the heart of great leadership. And here, John Williams is really articulating a coaching approach. So it's not command and control. It gets the best out of people by making an assumption that they are creative and resourceful. They're talented. So his role as conductor is to draw out the best from them. And I think the best leaders and the best managers do this. And I think it's up to all of us to make a decision about what kind of manager or leader we want to be and how we want to be managed and led. And I think this is such a brilliant approach. So to bring this all together, I think this is about how we make beautiful music together. And I hope that in all of your endeavours, you enjoy the challenges ahead, and that in some way, some of today's webinar will stay in your mind and inspire you in the future. Before I finish, I just want to thank my friend Dom Curry for writing the music for today's session. It's all been originally composed, so I'm indebted to him and to his talent. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you have any comments, please let us know. Any feedback about the session, it'd be lovely to hear from you. And again, if there's any subjects that you'd like to hear more about, let us know. And to finish, I'd just like to thank my guests, Emily, Christina and Claire. Thank you so much for your contribution today.
Great. Well, that was wonderful session, and the music was really stimulating. People seem to be really enjoying it. So now we're ready for a few questions. I mean, do you want to make a comment about how it was listening back after your recording?
It's interesting to kind of consider all the themes about music, and particularly like the orchestra. I think it is a great metaphor for organisations and for teams, and that idea of kind of bringing it all together, and I guess how you bring the best out of people and teams is an important point, and one that I think connects very strongly with coaching too. So that idea of rather than having all the answers yourself, to draw out the best performance, like a conductor would draw out the best from players in an orchestra. So I'm quite taken with that as a metaphor, but I'd be interested to hear what others felt.
Yeah, so do join in the chat, anybody. I think there was one person who would like to speak, Sheila Campbell-Lloyd. Brilliant, Paul. Very, very thought-provoking. Thank you very much, Sheila. Now, somebody, just while we're on that, did ask the name of the book you mentioned. I think it was the Cantor one. Could you just remind people? And I did say, of course, that you got a deck of slides that will show the details to share at the end.
Yeah, the book's called Reading the Room by David Cantor. It's a really good book. It's written almost like a story as well, set within an organization. So it's like a case study, a fictional case study, but it takes you through all the different elements of the model, and it gives you lots to kind of think about. So it's suitable for leaders and for coaches, and it also forms part of that Coaching the Childhood Story course that I spoke about, which relates to the Sarah Hill's work.
Mm. So we've got a few questions that people had emailed in earlier. So how could people use music more at work was one question.
Well, I think, and maybe a lot of people have already been started to experiment with this, but I think listening more mindfully and choosing the kind of music that you personally can listen to help you, to improve productivity, for example. So there's been lots of research done into that, and actually the type of classical music you choose as well, if you like classical music, but even like experimenting with that. I mean, studies have been done into listening to Mozart, for example. They've done it with students before exams, and they've actually raised the number of points that they've scored, but I think it was like 10 extra points, but just by listening to Mozart. So you can imagine actually that kind of practical application in the workplace, it can really enhance your performance and enhance your productivity. I would also say there's opportunities to use music as part of meetings as well. Playing a piece of music before brainstorming, for example, it allows people to really relax and think more intuitively about how they're connecting with certain subjects. So that's worth kind of experimenting with and using music as a kind of stimulus before getting into, the nitty gritty of work. And again, I guess going back to that model of, affect, meaning and power, anything you can do to kind of stimulate interesting debate. And it's about, bringing difference into the room and working with it rather than shutting things down. And you will have a certain amount of tension, I think, but often that's what creates really interesting solutions and interesting work, in my experience. So you can't avoid challenge, you can't avoid tension, I think. But it's how you use it creatively to get great results. So that's a couple of examples of how you could use music.
And Claire mentioned about how people were feeling in lockdown and potentially returning to work. And then there's been a bit of chat going on with people on the chat about particularly young people being keen to go back and others being not so keen about it and discover the freedom of not playing a role. So is there anything you can suggest that might help tease people's thoughts about returning to work and different people's attitudes?
Yeah, well, I guess if we're talking about music, I guess it's thinking about how you're feeling about that. And sometimes it's about leaning in and going with the emotions that you initially feel. And I think music can really help you explore that in quite a safe and interesting way. So, I often have pieces of music that I go back to that help me cope with different situations. So sometimes it's appropriate to feel sad, for example.
Yeah.
And rather than ignoring that emotion, why not listen to a bit of melancholic music? Sometimes we need to have a cry. Stuff like that. I think half the time we're battling against what's quite natural. So I think music can really help us to explore some of those emotions. So, if you're feeling worried about things, listen to some different types of music. Equally, I know there's a piece of music that I can listen to that will bring me up, make me feel more positive and give me confidence. So I think it's experimenting, and I think that's the fun behind it. There's lots of stuff you can do to kind of find music that really speaks to you and speaks to your soul.
Yeah. And there was a question earlier on about how can an understanding of team dynamics help leaders and teams?
Well, I think it can help you appreciate the kind of differences. So it helps with diversity, I think, and differences in personality and differences in thinking, and actually by understanding and welcoming, more difference just within a room, within a conversation. I think it gives a leader more choices, to listen, because it's not always about lots of rhetoric and exciting people with a brilliant speech. Sometimes it's about being quiet and tuning in to what's going on with employees or people within a room. And really listening, and I think if you develop those skills, that's why I'm passionate about teaching leaders at all levels, all managers, coaching skills, because I think it sets you up to succeed, really.
And are you optimistic that more leaders are going to develop a coaching style?
Well, I think so. I think certainly it's on many more leaders' agendas now, and I think there's lots of evidence to suggest that leaders that take on that approach tend to, win people's trust, win their respect, and I think, it's about making those connections with people. Sometimes in small ways, in meetings, sometimes on a grander scale. I think leaders have to learn how to connect with people, how to listen, and how to ask great questions.
Yeah, and we did talk a bit at the beginning about resilience. So how important is it to use music, do you think, to help build resilience? Or is there some nice, easy ways that people can?
Well, I think it's about, it's really interesting because, Rosie, who wrote that lovely piece of piano music, she was part of a resilience group that I was running. And, as part of the conversation, people started to share, pieces of music that really meant something to them or that, really helped them. And by sharing that within that community, people were creating their own playlists and things like that. So they were not only connecting with one another, but they were also recognizing things within themselves, strengths, if you like. And I think music can do that in a very intuitive way, almost a magical way, because it's not words, is it? It's speaking to people in quite a profound way. And Rosie came back and said one of our musical exercises had inspired her to write that piece of music. So that's why I asked her to whether I could share it here, because actually I think that's just a lovely example of how when you're resilient, you can be creative. Look what Rosie produced.
Yes.
I'm wondering what the people out there could produce when they're feeling, resilient and creative and resourceful.
Yeah.
Because that's what it's all about, I think.
Yes. Well, thank you very much, and also for, as you said, arranging for original music to be provided. That was very special, and for your guests participating. Indeed, that was a great opportunity. So thank you very much, Paul.
No, at all.
Thank you. So, as we said, very warm thank yous to everyone who got involved in bringing you this webinar, and I hope you'll get a lot out of it. And so, just as Paul mentioned, there are other things as well that we've got in the pipeline to support you and as individuals and teams. So Paul will be putting on an online workshop on the 17th of September, building on the theme of resilience. So if you're interested in that, do get in touch. Across the Think Global People and Relocate Global People, we are going to be developing a programme to encourage and support global leadership. And then coaching, as we've discussed many times, is really valuable. So do get in touch if you're looking for coaching, either for individuals or teams. And of course, we'd be delighted, or Paul would be delighted to respond if you've got particular workshops that you're interested in. And then we'll be having more forthcoming webinars, both in leadership and development, but also in global mobility and international education in schools. So coming up on the 8th of September, Future Fit Global Talent, New Horizons. And then we have another in our series of international education in schools with TASIS England on the 11th of August. As we mentioned, there will be a replay of this video that you can share with colleagues and listen back to yourself. So within 24 hours, 48 hours, we'll send you an email and the link to replay it and share. And in addition, Paul has kindly put together a special deck of slides which you can request. If there'll be details on the email you'll send, but also you can email events@relocatemagazine.com to get a copy. And we'd encourage you to please, if you like this sort of environment and you want to interact with more people in management and leadership, then do join our Think Global People community and Think Women community networks. As some of you will know, Relocate Global has plenty of resources to support you in managing international people, and you'll find a lot of these on our website, which include a fabulous set of fact sheets which covers all sorts of things from talent and inclusion and diversity to global mobility policy issues. So all that remains to say is to thank you again very much for joining us today. And I hope you will be able to put music into your leadership development and enjoy that with your teams. So thank you very much for joining us, and we hope to see you again soon. Bye.